All right. Hey, sixth graders. We are talking about cells today, and hopefully, you have either printed the two handouts on Google Classroom or you have drawn a plant and an animal cell. You're going to need either those handouts or those diagrams today as we go through these notes. So, what you're going to see as we're working through is that there's a ton of information in this presentation. And we're going to talk through all of it, but we aren't going to write everything down. So, any slide where you see Mr. Smith or I with a pencil, that's your indication that this is a slide you need to be writing the information down on either your printout or in your notebook or the diagram you drew, something like that. So whenever you see one of our pictures with a little pencil, that's your cue to start writing. So even though we aren't together and we can't really share with a partner what we're thinking, I've got two questions I want you to think about from things we've talked about. So cells function similarly in all living things. Is that true or false? And then what are the cell theory parts? So in the ed puzzle you watched last week, it talked about the three parts of cell theory. And so as we kind of go forward, keep those in mind. So cells do function similarly. If you said that is true, you are correct. And our three parts of cell theory are that all living things are made up of one or more cells, that cells are the basic units of all living organisms, and that cells come from pre-existing cells, meaning they don't just appear out of nowhere. They have to come from another cell. All right, so we are going to be looking at plant and animal cells, and what we're going to specifically be looking at is the organelles that are in them. So on this one, you can see Mr. Smith down here with a pencil, meaning you do need to write, and I just need you to write this first kind of sentence about what an organelle is. So organelles are small structures within the cell, and they perform specific functions for the cell. So they each have a job inside of the cell to help the cell work to do its overall job. So you've got some organelles that are going to be found in just plants and some that are going to be found in just animals, but we have a lot that are going to be in both. So when you think about structures and the structure of an object or the function of an object, you can think like an example would be the structure of a house is based on how wood, bricks, and other materials are placed. All living things perform functions like breathing, taking in food, removing waste, those characteristics of life that we talked about last week. And cells perform functions that allow those organisms to be alive. So it's the organelles that are going to help us with that. So you've either got these two pages that you printed out or you drew them with me using the other two videos that I posted. So what you're going to do is as we come to a function, if it's on both pages, then you'll write it in the box on both of them. If it's just in one, obviously you'll just write it on the one where it appears. If you drew your notes and you don't have room to write on that paper, you can on a separate sheet in your notebook write like cell membrane and then what it does. And then I would just suggest putting plant only, animal only, or both if it's found in both, if you're writing there. So this is, in case you're still struggling with exactly what you need to do, you're going to have this picture or one that you drew, and then you're going to write in the little box its definition or what its function is for that organelle. If you don't have room, do it on a separate piece of paper, totally fine. Okay. So the first one we've got here is the cell wall. And the cell wall we've talked about in class, it provides structure and support for the plant cell. So this one is only on a plant cell and it provides structure and support. Okay, and you can always pause too. If I'm going faster than you write, pause, write it down, and then when you're ready to go on, hit play again. So the cell wall is made of cellulose, which is tougher and thicker than a cell membrane. It's a really, really strong material, and this is what provides that rigidity and helps protect and support the cell for plants. Because remember, they don't have a skeleton system like an animal does, and so they need something to provide them some support and structure. And so the cell wall is beneficial to them in that way. The cell membrane, here again, you've got our picture. So you're writing again. Whoops. There we go. The cell membrane is a flexible material and it holds the cell together. And its job is to control what enters and exits the cell. It acts as a barrier between kind of the rest of the world and the cell, and it blocks materials out or keeps materials in, depending on what it needs to do at that moment. So if it has waste it needs to allow out, it will, but then it can also protect the cell from things coming into it that shouldn't be there. And this is in both plants and animals. So if you're writing on the printouts, you're putting this on both pages. If you are writing just in your notebook, then you just want to put both plant and animals as one of your bullet points. All right, so a little bit more about its structure. It's not solid. The cell membrane is actually porous, meaning it's got tiny, tiny holes in it that allows molecules to move in and out of the cell. In plants, the cell membrane is found between the cell wall and the rest of the cell. So in an animal cell, it's the cell membrane and then all the stuff inside. In a plant cell, we have the cell wall first on the outside, then the cell membrane, and then all the organelles and other stuff inside the cell. All right. So try and think, one of the easiest ways to make a connection to cells, because they're not something we can see, is to think of an example. So something else in the world around us that might act similar to a cell membrane. In the example I have for you, and you can, I'm sure there's others and come up with more, but it's kind of like a screen door. And a screen door or a screen on your window, it allows air to come in and out, but it keeps bugs outside. So a screen door might allow the breeze to come through the room, but it's not going to allow the flies to come into the room, which is going to be very similar to the cell membrane. The next organelle we have is the nucleus. And again, you need to be writing. The nucleus is like the brain. It controls what the cell does. It's eating, its movement, its reproduction. Sometimes we call it the control center of the cell, and it is found in both plants and animals. And it's going to contain the genetic material. The genetic material, if you remember from last week's Ed puzzle, tells the cell what to do. And that information is all going to be found in our nucleus, at least in eukaryotes. And it's going to then use that information to tell the cell and control its activities. So here's a picture from under a microscope where you can actually see the nuclei, which is just the plural for a nucleus. But here the arrow, the red arrow, is pointing to, these are individual cells under a microscope, and you can see the arrow pointing to the nuclei in that cell. So under a pretty powerful microscope, you can see cells, like I showed you earlier when we did the characteristics of life, the cheek cells and the onion cells. You can see cells, and occasionally, if you've got a really kind of larger nucleus or a really powerful microscope, you're able to see that nucleus, but you can't see all the other organelles as well as you can see a nucleus. So the nucleus, another example sort of outside of cells that might help you remember what it does. It's going to be like the boss in a factory. It's going to control the activities, control the operations, make sure everything's doing its job, similar to a boss in a factory. So again, I'm sure you can come up with your own example here that might help too. Since you can't share that with a neighbor, I'm just sharing my example that kind of helps me remember what they do. So the nucleus of the cell, like I said, it contains the genetic information. This genetic information is called DNA, and human cells can actually contain 6 feet of DNA in the nucleus, which is huge considering how small the nucleus actually is and a cell is, but it contains 6 feet of DNA. So the next one we're looking at is the nucleolus, and this is in both plants and animals, but I'm pretty sure it's only on your animal picture because of space. But it's the round sphere shape that is inside your nucleus, and it makes ribosomes for the endoplasmic reticulum, which we say ER for short, but it is both in plants and animals. All right, the next one is the cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm is the jelly-like fluid that is what all these organelles are sitting in. It fills the cell. It's what the organelles kind of float around in. It is definitely in both, but it's basically all that empty space you're seeing in the cell that doesn't really have a shape to it. It's just all that background is the cytoplasm. The next one is the mitochondria. This is one of my favorites. I don't know why, but it's one of my favorites. And it is the powerhouse of the cell. And I always, mitochondria, I hear the word like mighty at the beginning of that, which is where I remember powerhouse. But it is where nutrients and energy is created for the cell. So if you drew the picture with me, we drew a lightning bolt in it. It's not actually a lightning bolt in it, but it's another way that kind of helps me remember what its job is. And it is in both plants and animals. So the structure of the mitochondria, I know we drew a lightning bolt, but it's not actually a lightning bolt. It is kind of shaped like a bean. Like I said, if you watched my other video, it's got an outer membrane that covers the organelle, while the inner membrane is folded a bunch of times to increase its overall surface area. And this increased surface area allows for more reactions to take place in the organelle. And then more reactions means more energy for the cell. Next one is the ribosomes. Ribosomes, these connect amino acids to build proteins. So ribosomes build proteins. Proteins are an essential part for cell function, and they are both in plant and animal cells. So they're those tiny little dots that are kind of all over your picture. Then we have the rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is fun to say. Sometimes it's abbreviated ER or rough ER, just so they don't have to say endoplasmic reticulum, but it's fun to say. So, but the endoplasmic reticulum, its function is a protein manufacturing and packaging system. So it basically is going to be a maze of pathways that carries proteins and genetic material all over the cell. And it's in both plants and animals. So again, you're going to end up writing that on both, or if you're doing bullet points on notebook paper, just writing both plants and animals. So the rough ER structure, it gets its name because it has ribosomes attached to the outside surface, making it rough as opposed to smooth. So there is a smooth ER, a smooth endoplasmic reticulum that's going to not have ribosomes, but the rough gets its name because of the ribosomes that cover its outside. For this one, their ribosomes are kind of like a factory because it manufactures proteins. So that one, ribosomes make proteins. But if you need a like image in your mind, you can think of like a ribosome factory making proteins might help. Then the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which I already mentioned, it is very similar to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It is going to help create lipids and hormones and help also transport those throughout the cell. It's in both, but it doesn't have ribosomes on it. So it specializes more in lipids and hormones as opposed to protein. So again, it's a tube that's kind of folded up or looks kind of folded up, but it's smooth because it does not have ribosomes. The Golgi body is also in both plants and animals. Its job is to gather simple molecules and sort and package them into complex molecules. So it's kind of like the mailroom of the cell. That's how I remember this one, is it's like the post office, that it's going to gather everything and pack it up and send it out as like a delivering the mail or something. This is where the proteins are brought from the ER, and the Golgi body then packages them up and distributes them to the rest of the cell. Which, when you watch the Ed puzzle for this week, it's another Amoeba Sisters, and they do a good job kind of explaining that process of the endoplasmic reticulum shipping things to the Golgi body, and then the Golgi body distributing them to the cell. The Golgi body structure, it is a series of membranes. I called them pancakes in my video because they kind of look like a funky stack of pancakes, or a maze. If you kind of see it that way too, that is fine. Then we have chloroplasts, and chloroplasts are unique to plant cells. They are the way that a plant produces food by converting light energy into sugar from the sun. And then that sugar gets used by the cell as food. So chloroplasts should actually be over here is where you should be writing. This one's in the wrong spot, this arrow. It should be over here. It is in plants only. Chloroplasts are filled with discs. These little stacked up, they look like piles of nickels or dimes. And they're discs that contain pigment called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what captures the sunlight to be used in photosynthesis. And they've got kind of a green tint to them. So a lot of times in pictures, they'll get colored green because they're actually what's responsible for the plant's coloring anyway, because they reflect green light. Chloroplasts are kind of like solar panels on a house because they use the sun's energy to generate power. So that's another way to kind of help remember what they do, is that they're kind of like solar panels. The centrioles These are found in animal cells mostly. Sometimes plants have them, but they are mostly in animal cells. And they are microtubules that help during cell division. So when cells divide and make more cells, their job is to help with that process. Then we have the vacuole. The vacuole is a storage bin for food and nutrients or waste. The vacuole is much larger in plant cells. So if you look at your picture on a plant cell, the vacuole is much bigger than it is on an animal cell, but it is found in both. Their size is just different. Plants are going to have one central vacuole, and animals are going to have smaller and usually more than one. They'll have like two or like you'll see in pictures, there'll be two or three smaller ones, where a plant's going to have one central vacuole. Lysosomes. A lysosome is where enzymes created by the Golgi body are used to digest food and remove waste. These are only found in animal cells, at least, again, really typically an animal cell thing. But they have enzymes that are used to break down and digest and remove food and waste from the cell. They're kind of like the garbage disposal of the cell. They break down old parts that need to be recycled and help clean up the cell. So I kind of think of them as the garbage disposal, or trash collector, things like that. So you've got your pictures and you're welcome to color them. I recommend coloring them the organelles to match. So like I would shade lightly the box that has like the definition, or color the word of like the chloroplast, I would color it green. And then on my plant cell, I would also color the chloroplast green, because it will help your brain make the connection between the organelle shape and picture and what it does. And you can go back and add color, but remember, doodle notes are just a way to help enhance our memory of the content. So when you're all said and done, here's my example of our plant cell with them, the coloring, but like my Golgi bodies are in pink, and I drew or colored the organelle on the picture in pink as well. My vacuole, since it stores things like food and water, and it's blue, I did its similar matching color on the vacuole picture here. And then my animal cell is finished as well. Also matching colors. And I think that's everything for our cell organelles. So make sure you watch the Ed puzzles assigned and do the rest of the assignments for the week. And then we will talk on Thursday. And if you have any questions about organelles, bring them to our Thursday meet. See you later, guys.